Yep, you read the title correct. We're doing a sequel. And trust me when I say this is gonna be better than Shrek 2. Or maybe Grown Ups 2. You can't mention peak cinema without bringing up Grown Ups 2. Anyways, enough of the good sequel talk. Let's just get on with the video. So, Charles Peralo. Now, I'm gonna naturally assume that most of you watching this have probably seen the original video, but if you haven't, I'm gonna give you a quick recap as to what has happened and what led to the sequel to this video. So, to briefly talk about who Charles Peralo is as a YouTuber, he is someone who makes shorts related to celebrity news and community posts that basically ask questions, either controversial or just general opinions. Now, at first glance, Charles Peralo's channel seems innocuous at first from what I'm describing to you. What has he done that warrants a video about him? The thing is, some of Charles's actions on his YouTube channel has almost led to some of his audience turning against him. And one of the most egregious examples of his fanbase turning against him was his actions related to charity. For those who don't know, this is what a typical charity post from Charles Peralo looks like. You get both how this is supposed to work, alongside the charities provided. Now, at first glance, it doesn't seem all too malicious, but it's what's supposed to happen afterwards that have basically rocked people the wrong way. A thing that Charles promised to do after the whole thing was said and done was that he would post the receipts as evidence to show he actually donated to charity and therefore kept his word. But most of the times he didn't, and when people would ask about it, he would basically shut down their arguments. The whole thing can really be considered a clusterfuck to me. On one hand, you think he's lying about it all, and on the other hand, you think he's actually telling the truth, is that he just doesn't know how to respond to things that way. So with all that said, I felt it was my time to do some investigation work to see if he was actually being truthful or not. My initial idea for the investigation work was to set up an interview with Charles Peralo, talking about the whole charity thing, cleaning up the air, and it would be all said and done. However, my approach was abysmal, to say the least. And rightfully so, Charles declined. To be fair to myself, I wasn't really experienced with interviewing myself, so I could see why he turned it down, because it was probably dodging a bullet, to say the least. So Charles, you did something good. But one thing I did before wrapping it all up was asking him a bunch of questions, talking about the receipts, a community post that was up for a few hours but then deleted, and also a criticism I had of him about him being extremely defensive about the whole charity thing. And that was the moment where it all went fuck up. Basically, it was an amalgamation of dodging questions, insulting me, saying this whole thing isn't as bad as it seems, just the whole 9 yards of being a douchebag. And that is basically what inspired me to make that video in the first place. But even though the video was all said and done, there was one question that I was still pondering. Was he being truthful or not? The thing is, not once in his interaction did he say that he was being truthful with evidence, mostly just saying it rather than showing it. This is sadly a common thing with Charles Peralo, and it's actually more frustrating than satisfying. It all in all just makes it more confusing whether or not he's actually being truthful or not. I still didn't have a clear answer whether or not Charles was actually being truthful or not, so I decided to go with another method in order to come to a proper conclusion. The method in question? Contacting the charities firsthand. So, strap yourselves in as we go on to round 2 of Charles Peralo and Charity Conundrum. The first thing I did was write an email to all of the charities that Charles has listed on his charity post, asking about if they had his name in their records. I delved into why this was necessary to do, and also linked his channel in case of any references. The charities in question I wrote to were Red Cross Foundation, No Kid Hungry, St. Jude's, and Prevent Child Abuse America. However, only one responded, and that was No Kid Hungry. According to them, the name Charles Peralo was not in their database. They also talked about how they have not been able to reach him, but they will monitor his actions. They also speculated the reason he wasn't in the database was either it hadn't been processed yet, or maybe it came from a different entity. And they also finished off with me saying to be cautious whenever someone asks for donation funds. But to sum it up for me, it was basically them saying we didn't have his name in the database, so that made me jump to the conclusion that he was probably lying. So with the conclusion that he probably faked it, even though it only came from one source and not the other three, I decided to confront Charles. I confronted him during an Ask Me Anything of his, where this is something that he usually does once a while, and it's where you ask him a question and I'll give you a response. This is the comment I made. As you can see in the comment, I confront Charles about the whole no kid hungry response. But if you look more closer, you could say I start to talk about something that is very unrelated to the whole no kid hungry response. While I won't say this as a fact, this is something more of a skepticism I have with one of his receipts. This relates to a charity post where he did post the receipts. The inconsistency I want to point out in his No Kid Hungry receipt is that you can clearly see the date as 10th of February 2024. The issue I have? In his lengthy paragraph, he implies that it usually takes around 1 to 4 weeks to get a receipt. And the community post was made around 2 weeks ago from the screenshot, meaning it was either on the 11th of February or the 13th of February. The reason I brought it up was because it was basically a bizarre inconsistency that kinda made me think that he was lying more instead of actually being truthful. And soon enough, Charles did respond, in the worst way possible. He said that my comment was a lie and that he already donated to No Kid Hungry a lot of times. Once again, not showing any evidence to back this claim up. I then replied arguing against him, saying that I could post the proof through emails. I also mentioned about him not having the slightest bit of self-awareness. As in my lengthy comment, I say that the excuse of I've already donated has no bearings whatsoever because he doesn't actually show any evidence, just mostly says it. And what did he do? Do the exact same thing I was criticizing him for. Now, while I can't say that Charles genuinely has a lack of self-awareness, from the many interactions I've had with him, it probably is right that he doesn't have any self-awareness. But besides that, he also replied to my reply saying that I should email him the proof that I actually did reach out to the charity in the first place, and also called me a liar twice. So with that out of the way, I did go to his emails again and post the evidence that I did reach out to the charities. And what followed next was a few receipts from Charles showing that he did donate to charity. As you can see, some of the information I have blurred out for obvious reasons. The two from St. Jude's were from December 7th, 2023 and August 30th, 2022 respectively. And the No Kid Hungry one was the same one that was on his community post and the one I pointed out an inconsistency with. Now you could all say that this is a happy ending, you know. I got my evidence, I got my confrontation that he was actually donating to charity, and all this can just close like a book. Happily ever after. Except that wasn't the case. Instantly after posting the receipts, he decided to make an email that was basically berating me for starting this whole thing in the first place. Saying I was only doing this to seek some stupid drama, saying it was insane to reach out to the charities to confirm whether he was actually donating or not, telling me to admit wrong, and saying that I was doing a terrible job at what I was trying to do, in a polite way. Now while you can say he's trying to make some valid criticisms to me, what I can't get past is how snarky he is in this delivery. It doesn't feel like he's offering criticism for the sake of trying to help me improve on what I usually do, but instead he's using this criticism to try and basically dehumanize me, saying what I'm doing is terrible and I should feel bad about doing it. And yes, I will admit that my production value is very inferior to what you usually see on commentary videos. It's mainly because I don't really have that much resources compared to all the other commentators, so there's probably my excuse, or maybe I'm just not putting in the effort. But however you spin this, to me it's clear that Charles just doesn't want to admit responsibility, but instead is trying to dehumanize me in order to make me feel bad about trying to talk about this situation in the first place. He's not actually giving constructive criticism to me personally, but instead he's using destructive criticism in the hopes that I cowered out of him and never speak to him again. But to probably no one's surprise, it didn't work. In my response, I stated that it was not made to seek drama in the first place, but to more come to a more viable conclusion more than anything. The second one was telling him that being passive-aggressive to comments like these are not how you're supposed to respond to shit like this. When you respond in a passive-aggressive manner like you, you don't actually create the feeling that you're a nice person, but instead you're just trying to deflect responsibility by pinning the blame on someone who answered the question in the first place. It simply worsens the situation than actually helping it. And the last one was explaining my reasoning as to why I reached out to the Charities. The reason I went to the Charities in the first place was because Charles was disingenuous to me whenever I asked for the receipts. And he did this multiple times, so it was clear that he's not meant to be trusted with this. So I just thought, why not I just go to the Charities firsthand so they could post the evidence and it will be all clear. But no, apparently something as evidence is too much of a foreign concept. And the very last line was just a throwaway insult to him. I don't know why I included it, I just thought it'd be funny. After I gave my degree of yapology into use, Charles decided to respond again, and there are two things that I want to cover that I think are very necessary. The first one I want to get into is that he claims that I never tell him what to do, to which he's obviously referring to the evidence that I want. Now, to be fair to Charles, I only did ask once where he does post the receipts, to which he said he just posted it in his community tab, which was clearly false. As I said in my previous video, I can't go back to posts more than 3 weeks ago, so I can't confirm the validity of that statement. And to add on to this part, when I gave him other questions, most of the responses were either dodging it or just passive-aggressive insults. And from that point on, the conversation just went from asking where the receipts are to just condemning him as a person. So yes, I know that I didn't really tell you what to do, but the thing is that even if I did tell you what to do, you'd still ignore that and still try to dodge that question. The second thing I want to talk about is how he tries to spin the narrative into thinking all of this was because I didn't get my interview. To which, depending on how you want to look at this situation, you might think this is actually kind of a fair criticism. But to my response is that it was never my intention to coerce Charles into an interview. I didn't use the questions as a way to get him into the interview. It was just more to get more context before I wrap up. I have no idea how to explain it, but all you need to know is that it was not done with any malicious intent. And speaking of why I made the video, it was not because of some unsubtle vendetta I had against you, but more so showing people how much of a person you really are. And also to raise some awareness about this and get more people talking about it. I will say I didn't specifically mention why I made the video in the first place, but I can tell you it's not because I didn't get the interview. My possible outcome as to why he mentioned the interview is that he wants to spin the narrative into thinking the video was made with malicious intent, which, as I've already said, is not true. But moving on to the other response, this one was more centered on the initial video. The bottom line was that he found it to be terrible, both in research and in quality. He also told me that he was not going to apologize for not wanting to be in an interview. He also said that I was also in the wrong for bringing up the false rumor to him, to which in my honest opinion, I don't really get this complaint. I know you have trolls constantly on your back for this whole thing, so I could see why you are kinda the way you are. Maybe it's some trust issues. But even with the trust issues part, that's more of an explanation and not an excuse. Not only were you trying to avoid the questions as much as you can, but you were also insulting me. That doesn't strike me as someone with trust issues. That strikes me as someone with a narcissistic attitude that doesn't want to take any responsibility for himself. So to really sum it up, the false rumors is not my fault, but you're trying to say that it is. It just shows how unwilling you are to take criticism. And on the topic of criticism, the next part I'm gonna show is just so much worse. So seeing that I was unwilling to accept that that video was made because I didn't get the interview, he decided to use another tactic, which I can only say is next level manipulation. So instead of wanting me to say that I made the video because I didn't get the interview, he said that he was going to accept an interview by me. And at first, while I wasn't really considering the interview part since I basically abandoned it, I thought I might as well have given it a go and say I can do the interview. But he had a few conditions I had to adhere to in order to do the interview, which was a massive turnoff. The first condition was to delete the video I made. The second was to title the interview as Charles Peralo is pretty cool. The third one was to apologize to Charles Peralo and admit he did donate. And the fourth one was that I handle everything about the interview while he just sits down. The pointers that are the most interesting to me are the first three. To respond to the first one, I'm simply not deleting the video. I don't care if he tries to delete the video in any way, shape or form. I'm sticking to my guns, and my guns tell me that I should not delete the video. Well, yes, some of you may say that it is slanderous to a degree, but in my defense, I don't think the video is that much of a hate piece. Well, yes, you could say I do definitely go into depth on how much of a terrible person Charles is, but that's mainly to give constructive criticism, not destructive. There is a very clear difference between the two. One is that you actually want to see the person succeed, and the other one is you want to see the person fail. And in the context of my video, I made it not only to farm more engagement about this subject, but also make Charles respond to all of this and actually clear up some of the air. The second pointer is actually worse in context when you actually conjunct it together with the first one. Basically, how it goes is that the video I made is initially deleted, and it's then replaced with an interview that talks positive about Charles Peralo. The thing is, Charles, is that it's going to be obvious to everyone that you're trying to use your power to influence me, to make me say what you want to hear. It would also be weird to go from a video where I kind of talk negatively about you to a video where I talk positively about you. It's gonna make people immediately assume that you were the one responsible for it, so there's no point in trying to do it, my guy. The third one pretty much has the same criticism I have for point number 2. It wouldn't make sense as to why I would be suddenly apologizing for supposed misinformation about you. It's obvious that he does not want to actually address the situation, but instead change it to something that pleases him the most. That way, this whole situation can be all done and he doesn't even have to do anything about it. All he can do is sit back and relax in relief that this whole situation is over, not because we reasoned together, but because he changed the narrative to something he likes. The thing is, dodging responsibility is one thing, but coercing someone to change from a hater to a fan is truly pathetic. It doesn't do anything to fix the situation, but instead it only just makes it worse. And so after he gave me those reasons, I of course declined. So now you're just there wondering, so if you declined, what did he try to do next? Well, he threatened to report the video to YouTube and sue me for defamation. I'm not making this shit up, this is literally his words. So I just said this. Now that we have essentially reached the end, it's time to give my actual final thoughts on Charles Peralo. My final thoughts are, while he did definitely donate to charity, he is a shitty person. He's simply a person who does not like any negative criticism whatsoever, no matter if it's good or bad. The final thing I really have to say to Charles is, this is your own fault. You could have responded in a nice way, taking accountability and responsibility and owning up to your mistakes. But you didn't, and you responded in the most immature way possible. I'm sorry if this video comes off as negative, but I say the only reason why is because I'm just so furious at him. And yes, I know criticism is hard to hear, but sometimes you have to take it because it can actually improve you as a person. If you don't learn to take constructive criticism, then you're just basically gonna be an asshole. And I don't care what kind of bullshit you come up with, you're not gonna change my opinion on you anytime. You had the chance and you blew it.